Welcome to the show. This is Sean and Ari Discuss Israel, where each week we take a deep dive into a different idea or concept that's pressing in Israel during this time. This week Sean is on vacation, so I will be here. This is Ari hosting today with my great guest, Avi Kahn. Avi, say hello to everybody.
Hi, everybody. Ari, thank you so much for having me. This is a pleasure, and I'm glad we finally get to sit down and do this.
It's an honor to have you here. So we're going to discuss again today another personal interview. We're going to talk a little bit about Avi and the events surrounding October 7th from his perspective and how he saw and understood things and what he did. But more importantly, we're going to talk about the emergency response teams that have been created in many localities across Israel since October 7th, what the situation was before the war, what's changed, because that is something that Avi is intimately involved in. So we're going to jump right into it. So before we start, how about you share a little bit of your background with us, where you're from, when you came to Israel, what brought you to Israel, and what have you done since making Aliyah? And let's fast forward from there straight to October 7th.
Great. So I'm just a dude from Columbus, Ohio. I made Aliyah in 2015, officially in 2018, but I came to Israel originally in 2015 for yeshiva. After high school, did Shana Aleph, Shana Bet, joined the army, drafted to Tzanchanim, finished my service, officially made Aliyah, and started working in security. Eventually got out of that, went back to an old passion of mine, which was filmmaking, and got into the commercial tech industry with video production. Met the love of my life in Beit Shemesh, and we were married in 2021. Been living in Beit Shemesh ever since, happily. And we have a young baby, our first, Yair Binyamin. I'm sure we'll get to that. He was born in the war, so we might get to that in the podcast at some point. Yeah, that's me, and been active in Miluim for a few years now, also with Tzanchanim, and I believe that takes us to around October 7th.
For most of us, October 7th is Simchat Torah. We go to shul in the morning, we dance. The sirens, at least in the Jerusalem area, started around 8:15 in the morning. In Beit Shemesh, I think it was around the same time. It was a little earlier, because they're a little bit further south. So take us through the events of that morning, from when you wake up in the morning, when you recognize that you're being called up, to getting to your call-up depot. Now, just to share, Avi has the same emergency call-up depot as I do. We're in the same division, completely different brigade, same division. So we went to the same place. Avi was there much earlier than I was, but let's go through that in the morning. What's going through your head in the morning? What were you thinking about? How it was like your night before?
Sure. So yeah, it was a regular holiday, as a lot of people will tell you. Sukkot and Chol HaMoed, and trying to do something fun over Chol HaMoed just to say that you didn't waste Chol HaMoed and you got something done. And we get to Simchat Torah. I was staying by my in-laws, also in Beit Shemesh. Had a little bit of an earlier start on the day than most people. I got a call for United Hatzalah. I volunteer with them as a medic in my free time. So I got a call at around 6:15 in the morning. Wake up pretty early. My wife is used to it at this point, so just tell her I'm heading out on a call. And I drive out to, a little further south, like a southern area of Beit Shemesh, and as I'm going up to the apartment, so it's 6:30 in the morning, I start hearing already boom, 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 boom. And in Beit Shemesh, we're used to hearing those booms of the Iron Dome, when there's like a little flare-up in Gaza or something, but you hear one boom, like maximum two, and you might see the smoke in the air from the Iron Dome, but that's it. So this time, you could definitely tell that something was different, really just boom, boom, just not stopping. And it was still early enough in the morning that I really didn't process that something was off, that we were in like a really an extreme situation. So I went back to my in-laws and started having breakfast, just waiting to go to shul. And at around 8:30 in the morning is when we heard the first siren, also in Beit Shemesh. And that's when I started getting calls from my commanders of, listen, Avi, it's war, be ready, make sure you have your gear, make sure everything's ready to go. And at around 10:30, a couple of hours later, we got, I don't want to say the official call up because it wasn't so official, but we got WhatsApp texts saying that everyone get to base as soon as possible, and we'll get a mission. We'll be assigned a mission when we get there.
Okay, so you get this phone call, WhatsApp, is around 8:30 in the morning?
Yeah, I got the siren. The siren was 8:30, and then that WhatsApp came in at around 10:30. So at around 10:30, I'd already driven back to my apartment to get my gear.
So let's take this as you get that phone call. You realize now that you're leaving home. It's the holiday. You're not going to shul. You're going home to get your equipment. Do you say something to your wife? Do you shake your father-in-law's hand? I don't know what kind of relationship you have with him, but like, what's going through your mind? What mental process are you doing to transition from civilian to soldier? Like, what does that look like for you? Is your bag already packed and you just have to add something in, or is it all spread out and you have to collect it? What's it like for you?
So that's a great question. Being in Miluim, especially at that point, I was in Miluim for a few years now, and having any kind of appreciation for Israeli history, you have to know that if you're in a reserve unit and you live in Israel, so at one point, you're going to be called up. There's going to be something in the country that requires your unit's attention. So my bag was ready, as with most people in my unit. The bag was packed. It was totally ready to go. All I had to do was drive back to my apartment and grab it. And I think that's a really important attitude for, soldiers, reserve soldiers, civilians, everyone that lives in Israel should have that appreciation of Israeli history that we're unfortunately never so far away from a conflict, from war. So the bag was ready to go, and I bring it back to my in-laws. And my wife is Israeli. She was born here, so this is not a totally foreign concept for her, but she was 7 months pregnant at the time, so that definitely added a little tension to the moment. But that was it. She knew where I was going, and she wished me good luck. I told her I think I would be home by the next night. By Sunday night, I'll be home. So, which was obviously silly of me, but that's what I said. She said okay and wished me luck. I told my father-in-law to protect my family, and I headed out.
Okay, so you get to your emergency call-up depot, and I'm sure, like everyone else who's part of the same division, you've had many exercises where you just practice getting called up and getting your equipment and getting going. What is it like? So you got there a few hours before me already, so I know what the base looked like when I got there. But for our listeners, to describe it, is a ginormous army base. It's the headquarters for an entire division. Part of the division is reserve units, part is regular army service units, and most of the time this base is basically empty. There's huge warehouses where each brigade and each battalion has its own call-up depot warehouse, right? And they're spread out over a huge base. I know that your brigade is on the completely other, it's not even next to mine, even though we're like next to each other in the official order. You guys are on the other side of the base. Describe the sense of controlled chaos, because it's chaotic, but there's a sense of control. Describe the process of what you guys are going through. If you can share with us a little bit about what your position is within the brigade, battalion, however you want to play it, and what does that look like? Are you already getting your mission while getting your equipment? Is your equipment all there and ready and waiting, or were you guys one of the units that had their equipment magically disappear on them?
So a few things to unpack there. We get to this base, and it's obviously a swamp even at that, relatively early in the morning. I get there 11:30 in the morning. The attack had been going on for a few hours already, and it was filled with units that had been called up, units that had been unofficially called up, but their commanders told them to get there anyway, like us, and also soldiers that had not been told anything, but they said, I can only assume that we're going to get called up, like yourself. I know you went through something similar. I know we're going to get called up, so I'm just going to get there and do whatever I can and be ready to go. So it was a complete swamp, and the streets were packed, and you couldn't get close to the base with a car, so people were getting out of their cars kilometers from the base and walking there on foot, and the poor kid at the entrance to the base was trying to check everyone's IDs, and it would say, "Dude, get out of here! We're getting to our unit. Leave us alone." So that obviously didn't last very long. But we get to everyone's schlepping their bags and their equipment, trying to get to their area, and we get there and things are in full swing. There are people actively, the logistics officers that are trying to locate vehicles and equipment and trying to get people signed on to weapons and officially registered as now showing up to reserve duty and writing down their identification numbers. A lot of things kind of happened under the table there when people maybe weren't on the list all of a sudden were on a Humvee with a gun. So but that was October 7th. It was controlled chaos, but for the best reason imaginable. And I think you said yourself your unit had like an 150% show up rate. So we were the same way. So guys that you never saw are all of a sudden there. What can I do? Or where can I go? Where do I get my gun? Where can I? We get our gear. We get signed on, and we assume that we're gonna have now 24 to 48 hours, which is very standard for a reserve unit to zero their weapons and make sure that everything's working properly, and get assigned a mission and get briefed. And we assumed that's what was going on. So we were relatively calm. We knew that something serious was going on in the country, and that we were most likely at war, but we assumed that our own personal role would take a couple days to unfold, and that's when our Magad, our battalion commander, got us together. Just got us in a big circle and said, "Guys, there's something really, really serious going on down south. Our brothers and sisters are fighting for their lives and being slaughtered. And you have a gun, you have magazines. Nothing else matters. Find a vehicle, get on it. We're going down south."
All right, so you guys head out of the base at around 3 o'clock, which means on a normal day from where the base is located till the border of Gaza is about a 25 minute drive. That's about how long it took us that day. It took us maybe 30 minutes. It takes you guys about half an hour, also 40 minutes to get down south. Where do you go? What's your mission? What's your job? Let's get in that head for it. Let's get in that space for a minute.
So at that point, when we cross into the absolute war zone that was the south on that day, on that morning, we still had no official orders. We had no official call up. There were not a lot of people that knew that we were even there, but we were an entire battalion's worth of soldiers that had just shown up, just looking for where we could be the most relevant, where we could help the most, where's the thick of the fighting, where can we be used. I believe we might even have been the largest fighting force at that time on that day that was available. And so we were just desperately trying to find a place where we could help and be relevant. And so our battalion commander instructed the drivers, drive by the yeshuvim, drive by the settlements, and find somewhere that doesn't have chayalim, find somewhere where there's no forces responding. And eventually we got to Kfar Aza, and at that point the division commander heard of our presence there and decided to meet us there, and we get to Kfar Aza. And aside from a small team of Maglan and some police officers that had fought there before we got there, there was nobody there. There was nobody responding. There were still plenty of terrorists committing atrocities at that point within the settlement of Kfar Aza. And so our battalion commander said, "Stop here," and that's where our days of fighting began.
Okay, so you're in the village of Kfar Aza for the first 24, 48 hours. And then by then the army sort of organizes itself. There's some semblance of command and control reset. And then, like everyone else, you guys are pulled back at that point. The initial response that you guys gave was successful. You guys brought some level of security back. And then the plan started falling into place where whatever unit that was supposed to replace you comes replace you. You guys pull back to a different base to now actually do what you were supposed to do when you get called up. You zero your weapons, check everything, make sure you have enough, make sure all your radios are working, and all the stuff that everyone does when they first get called up and they have all the time in the world. What's it like now shifting down gears? So you were just in an intense 2 or 3 days. How long was it?
Till Tuesday night,
so about 3 days. 3 really intense days of war, and now you're shifting down for a minute. You can take your shoes off, you can shower, you can eat, you can call home. Mm-hmm. Like what was that initial break from fighting like? And at the same time, what was going forward, what was next for you?
So I think on one level, and I'll speak for the entire battalion at this point, or everyone that I was in Kfar Aza with, we didn't really realize or process what we had done or what we had been through. Even once we got to that base, when we were done with the fighting on Tuesday night, on Wednesday morning, once we got to that base, we didn't realize that we had just fought on, as we would now say, in Kfar Aza on October 7th, and everything that comes with that. We just thought we had, there was some fighting, and there was terrorism and murders, and we had seen everything we had seen in Kfar Aza, and we had done what we could to help the situation, and now we weren't sure what to expect. So now I think we appreciate way more the gravity of what we did and accomplished, and what we weren't able to accomplish, unfortunately. But at that point, it was almost like it was free fall. We didn't know what we had just done. We didn't know what to expect. We just were glad to have a night's sleep and a regular meal and a shower, and just wait to see what the next challenges would be.
Okay. So what was next for you guys? Now I want to get to talk about the emergency response teams, because that really seems like what your passion has been over the last couple of months, at least when I've been speaking to you. From here, you guys are sent up north for a little while, then you're back in Gaza. Tell us a little bit about what you did where, if you have an interesting story or two to share, and then we're going to get into the emergency response teams.
For sure. So we were sent up to the north for around a month and a half, I should say. Should definitely check the timeline, but more or less. And we were on call mainly in responding to small events, but mostly training for what people believed would be much larger operations in the north and Lebanon. against Hezbollah. And eventually we got orders, after that month and a half, we got orders to report down south and that we would most likely be going into Gaza. This was right before the first hostage deal. The IDF had not yet moved into the southern area of Gaza. They were still in the north of Gaza. And so we were given the orders to now move into the south, into the large city of Khan Yunis. And so we did. On December 3rd, we attacked the city of Khan Yunis along with the Givati Brigade and tanks. And thank God we were successful in our attack, and we fought there for 2 months, and we still have a presence there. There's obviously a lot of work still to be done, unfortunately, but we were there for fighting for 2 months, so trying to dismantle the Hamas brigades that were there in the area. One story that sticks out for me out of the many that we could discuss right now if we had an unlimited amount of time. But one story that I have to bring up is my son being born, our firstborn son, Yair. He was born in the war. He was born while his Abba was in Gaza, and I got the call in the morning. We were about to head out to a mission. We had gotten intel of some tunnels in the area and some weapons caches that we were supposed to go out to find, and I get the call on the radio to come speak to the company commander, the Mefaked Pluga, and I speak to him, and he said, my wife wasn't due for another week or even 2 weeks at that point, and he said, your wife's water just broke. She's on her way to Shari Tzedek. I said, okay, how are you getting me out of here? And he said, we can get you out of here tonight. And it was 7 a.m. in the morning at that point. I'm like, you're crazy. That's not happening. Thank God it ended up working out after a couple of really stressful hours. It ended up working out that they were able to get me to the border with a unit that specializes in getting out injured soldiers that happened to be available at the time, and they were able to whisk me to the border, and then a car from the unit took me straight to the hospital, and got there with an hour to spare, and thank God our son was born healthy and beautiful, and so I was thankful to be there for that, and I'm sure my wife was as well.
I also think your commander might have been more worried about your wife's wrath than Hamas's wrath at that point.
I think that's definitely true. I know my commander, he does not fear Hamas in the least bit, but my wife is a different story for sure.
So now we're winding down. You finish, your son is born. You had about 2 weeks off. You went back to Aza after that. Mm-hmm. Then you came out of Aza, and like a lot of reservists, like your piece of the war was over, at least for now, at least for this point. Like your unit was, you put all your equipment away, you cleaned everything, fixed everything, put everything away, and now you guys are like waiting for round 2 or 3 at this point. You go back to life, you go back home, you're with your wife, your new baby, and of course, instead of just sitting down and enjoying that, you have to do more, right? I've known you now for many, many, many years, and you've always impressed me as someone who there's always more to be done, right? Like you said before, and before the war, you volunteered with United Hatzalah. So it's like, even in your downtime, you're never really off. You always have half in, you're open, waiting to see who needs help and how you can help them. So at this point in time, Israel is creating all these emergency response teams across Israel. So now we're going to give a little bit of background on what the emergency response teams are and how they were. Mm-hmm. So for anyone who's been around and walks around Israel, you see that mainly, at least in Yerushalayim and in Judea and Samaria, and in mixed cities, there's enormously high percentage of the population is armed. Myself included, yourself included. We walk around, we're armed 24/7. So anytime I leave my house, I'm armed. And the idea being is that if you have a high percent of armed citizenry, anything that happens, there's always someone within earshot that could provide a very initial response. The police, even if their response times are really quick, it could be 4 or 5 minutes, which would be considered fast. 4 or 5 minutes, a lot can happen in 4 or 5 minutes. And if you get further away out of the city centers and out of major cities, the emergency responses by the police can take even longer. So by having an armed citizenry, you have people who can provide a response all the time. That is not an emergency response team. That's just a bunch of people walking around, and if they happen to be in the area. What's the goal of an emergency response team? How many of them are there? Are they everywhere? Are they always, are they sitting around waiting for something to happen? What's their role? How do they function? What can you tell us about it?
So you said it very well yourself, but there are a few categories of response teams in Hebrew. Kitot Konanut. Kitat Konanut is a response team. And there are a few categories, but they share the same purpose. They share the same goal, which is that in their city, in whatever city that they exist. They need to be able to provide an initial response, a quick reaction response as soon as possible to any kind of threat or event or attack on their city, on their yishuv, on their settlement, on their kibbutz. And that's usually based on the main factor there is how far away the closest Tzahal IDF unit is, or the closest police unit is, or border patrol unit is, whatever jurisdiction they fall under. So if a specific kibbutz it would take the army an hour to get there once they get the call that there's an event happening. So an hour, as you said, is way too long. 5 minutes even could be way too long. So the goal of these emergency response teams is to have citizens that live in that yishuv or settlement or kibbutz that are organized, that are armed, that are trained, that are funded, and they know to give that first initial response to whatever may be happening in their area.
So what would be different now from the response from an emergency response team and the response of just an armed citizen? You said they're armed. Are they armed in the same way that I'm armed with a handgun? Like, how is their response going to be different than me or the other random armed guy on the street's response going to be different?
Right. So one of these members or these groups as a whole, so they're armed to match more that of an army unit or a police unit. So they're not just an armed citizen who might be carrying a pistol and might happen to be in the area. They're now an organized force with equipment, with helmets, and they could look like soldiers in the IDF or in the police, and they have rifles. They might be given M16s or other variants of that rifle provided by the army or the police. They have radios. They've trained together. They know each other. They know exactly. They've divided different jurisdictions of their own kibbutz or yishuv, and so they know in whatever area there might be an event, they know how to properly respond to that quickly and effectively.
Okay, Avi. So how many emergency response teams are there across the country now, as opposed to before the war? Are they everywhere? Is there one right here down the block from where we are recording right now? And is there a difference depending on what jurisdiction they fall under? Whether they're in a built-up city, they'd fall under the police. If they're in the periphery and an outer area, more like the rural areas, they fall under the border police. And if they're in Judea and Samaria, they fall under the army.
The existence of these response teams very much differs from before October 7th and now in a post-October 7th world. Before October 7th, as you said at the beginning of the podcast, they mainly existed, these response teams, in areas that were considered sensitive areas with a high threat level. So that could be in Judea and Samaria. That could be in the Yishuvim, the settlements of the border with Gaza or the northern border with Lebanon. And so, or mixed cities like Lod that have a higher threat level. So these response teams existed mainly in those areas and were trained and funded by the IDF. Now, after October 7th, the country, the government, the civilians, the police, everyone kind of realized together, okay, we're in an entirely different kind of fight here, and we need to prepare. We need to arm ourselves, we need to train ourselves, and we need to have people, even in cities that are not generally considered sensitive, high threat level areas. Now it was more of the mindset that all of Israel is now a high threat level area, and so we need to prepare appropriately. So the police, not the IDF, not the military, but the Israeli police, formed, I think in just a few months after October 7th, between 600 and 800 new Kitot Konanut, new emergency response teams all over Israel, including my city where I live, Beit Shemesh, which did not have any kind of response team aside from the police. And so in these cities, the police formed and armed and trained and equipped civilians to now operate as a team that would respond to events, and not just in sensitive areas, now all over the country.
Okay. The police set up 600 to 800 response teams across the country. What kind of people were they recruiting? What kind of people joined the teams? I can tell you from my own personal experience that I was actually not allowed to join the response team in my community, in my neighborhood of Jerusalem. Yeah, I know, it's their loss. And you'll explain why in a minute. Like, you know exactly why they wouldn't let someone like me join. But what kind of people are recruited and who makes up these teams?
Sure. So there's a difference, again, between the police-funded response teams and the IDF response teams that have been around for a long time. But if we're discussing the police response teams that were formed after October 7th, so usually, and this is why I believe you weren't accepted, Ari, usually they're looking for people with an exemption from reserve duty. Why? The obvious answer is that if you are connected to and serve in a reserve unit, when something, God forbid, like October 7th happens, so you're rushing off to join your unit and to do whatever your unit is doing, leaving the city, unfortunately, defenseless. So, so I believe that's why
That's
you were
exactly
not
why.
accepted. I don't think it was your combat skill or prowess or experience or overall temperament, but but you need an exemption from reserve duty so they know that people are around. They know that they can count on people that will respond, that will only be with them in times of crisis. And in addition to that, they're looking for people who have service and experience in a combat role in the IDF. That they're not just looking for anybody that came to Israel yesterday. They're looking for people that have experience in combat units.
So, other than people who are exempt from reserve duty, are they taking anybody and training you from scratch to create these teams? Are they looking for, like you mentioned specifically, they won't take you unless you have an exemption from reserve duties? I mean, they're trying to recruit people who have previous significant combat service that they don't have to train now from scratch, that they can just slightly adjust their training to match the environment they're in. Can someone who made Aliyah yesterday, who doesn't even speak Hebrew, join an emergency response team? Besides not accepting people who go to reserve duty, who are they yes looking for?
Right, so they're definitely looking for people with some kind of combat experience. They're definitely not looking to have to train people from scratch, but also they accept that the people that are going to be attracted to joining these units and that they're going to have to accept are not going to be completely up to date with the new training and skills, and they're going to be a little out of shape just with those techniques and those tactics, if not out of shape physically as well. So they're looking for people that previously served in IDF combat roles. Maybe they've been out of it for whatever amount of years. The average age of these teams could even be 40 plus. But they're around. They have experience. They can be trained. They go through 4 days of training when they're brought onto the team. They're equipped. They're armed. They train a few times a year. And so that way, you have people who are, again, organized and equipped and relatively trained and ready to respond to events in the city. And I think it's important, before we continue, to re-mention the purpose of these teams, which is not now to fight for days and days and days against an invading force or an attacking force. The main goal of these teams is just to hold off the attacking force or whatever terrorist is committing violence in their area for long enough for the IDF or the police or whoever's jurisdiction it is to respond and to now take over the situation. So they're supposed to be just an initial force to provide some kind of defense, some kind of response until the army or police are able to get there.
I think a really good example of this would be how Israel has layered defense. Right? Our air defense is layered. We have like the arrow missiles, then we have David's sling, and then we have the Kfar Aza, the Iron Dome. And we have different layers that things would have to break through. So, for example, in the response to an attack, like we mentioned earlier, we have armed civilians. After armed civilians, we now have emergency response teams across the country. And after that, depending what jurisdiction you're in, there's always another go team. I know people think that on October 7th, the army didn't exist and the police didn't exist. There were emergency response teams that are always on call. There's teams that are literally sitting next to helicopters 24/7 waiting to respond to events. But there's only so many of them, and they can't. Then they were trained and they were built to respond to 1 or 2 events simultaneously, not 1,200. So the teams is another layer in that process that provides a little bit of breathing room for the system to come in and go on.
Precisely.
So what's your involvement with the emergency response teams? What's your role? How did you fit into this whole puzzle?
So my involvement, and I appreciate what you said about me before, that I was looking to do more. I think you over-exaggerated a bit, but I was looking to do more when I got out of Gaza. And my friend who was involved with training these Kitot Konanut, training these response teams, mainly in the area of Judea and Samaria and Yehuda v'Shomron, or some people call the West Bank. So my friend was involved with training these response teams, and he asked me, they were looking for other guys that knew what they were doing to train these teams as well. As I mentioned, these are people that have previously served in combat roles but are not up to date with everything that they need to know and need to be able to do. And so he asked me if I'd like to join the team and start training these Kitot Konanut, these response teams, and I said gladly. That's definitely something that I'd be interested in. And so for those few months after Gaza, that's what I was doing, day in and day out. And I would drive out from Beit Shemesh to the various settlements in the Shomron, Judea and Samaria. It would be different. Every day would be a different settlement, or every couple days would be a different settlement. And I got to know the guys eventually, and the different teams and the different commanders, and I would run training for them and teach them how to use their weapons properly and how to clear jams and how to work as a team and communicate and how to respond and in different capacities to different events and different scenarios, and how to be tactically appropriate and depending on the scenario and depending on how many forces were attacking, and so that was my life for the few months after Gaza.
All right, and now just to clear the air, are you part of an emergency response team yourself?
I was actually also rejected. No, I did not apply to Beit Shemesh's, even though I did train the Beit Shemesh response team. I trained them as well. No, I did not apply. But people were attacking Beit Shemesh. I'd grab my gun and, and head out there. But no, I'm not part of the response team. But I'm an armed citizen, ready to do my part.
Okay, can you give us examples of events that, since the war started, that these the emergency response teams have taken part in, proof of concept, we'll call it, of different events that happened, that they responded to, that they helped, that the plan that in theory we had, that the system has, actually worked?
Sure. So I'll give two examples, one of which I was actually personally involved with. In a shuv in the Hebron region called Adura in January. So there was an event of 3 armed terrorists that tried to come and infiltrate the yeshuv and commit atrocities in the yeshuv. And they ended up firing at one of the security vehicles that was driving by. And that response team, that was one of the vehicles of the emergency response team of Adura, of that yeshuv, and they were able to respond properly, and they ended up taking out those 3 terrorists and were commended properly, and they did a great job in preventing something that could have been way worse in their settlement. So that's proof of concept number 1, and that was obviously a very big deal for them, and a very, as you said, a very large, good proof of concept for them.
Okay, so that was one example of where an emergency response team provided a quick and fast solution to an attempted infiltration into a village called Adura. Can you give us is there another example that sticks out, something that happened since the war started, that also a second proof of concept?
For sure. So and around the end of February, there was an attack in the area of the Israeli village Eli, which is around 30-45 minutes north of Yerushalayim, north of Jerusalem. And before the attack happened, I was driving up to teach the response team of Eli. And I drove up and I had a whole session planned for them, and teaching them how to communicate and how to coordinate in the event of an infiltration to their settlement, and how to move as a team and how to spread out and go house to house if they needed to. And so we finished the session, we had a great time, and I'm leaving and I'm driving for maybe 10-15 minutes when I see on my phone, I get an emergency alert to an attack in Eli. And what ended up happening was there were a few terrorists that at the bottom of the village, there was a little hummus restaurant there. They attacked some civilians, they fired at some vehicles, and they were taken out by an off-duty soldier that was eating at the hummus place at that time, and I think another armed civilian took them out as well. But what I appreciated and what I liked was that response team, the response team of Eli, came down, and there was a chashash, there was a fear, there was a suspicion, that there was another terrorist that had actually succeeded in getting into the village itself, into Eli. And so at that point, their job as the emergency response team, before the larger IDF unit got there, was to go house to house and go street to street, and now go search for this terrorist that they believed got into their settlement. So not only were they able to drive down to the scene of the attack and secure the scene properly, but then they conducted a proper search in the village itself. And the commander of the unit was in touch with me after, and he said, "Avi, we did exactly what you taught us. They operated perfectly. We trained it literally an hour before, 30 minutes before." So that made me very happy, and also gave me a little feedback that I was doing the right thing, that I was doing something correct and good.
All right, Avi. So I think we're gonna end the episode right around here already. As is the custom on our podcast, we end every episode with a positive, inspirational, optimistic thought of how you feel about moving forward in Israel. So, what idea would you like to share with us?
Sure. So I think it's a good thing that you do. Number one, that you always end with a positive note, because unfortunately there's a lot to be negative about, and it's way easier to be negative in today's times than positive. But I'd like to say that I believe in our military and I believe in our people. And I'm not talking right now about the upper echelon, the leaders, the politicians. I'm talking about the people on the ground level. Our military is strong. Our military is committed. They're people that are driven. They're people like ourselves that leave their family and are willing to leave for however long it takes to defend their country and their nation. And our people, as we know, and how we've seen many, many times, our people are resilient, they're hopeful, and they're brave, and they too are strong. And I believe with a military like this one, with soldiers like these, and a people like this, I believe that we can accomplish anything, and I believe that we will get out of this stronger than ever.
Okay, well, that's the show for today. Avi, I want to thank you for joining us, and congratulations to you and your wife on the birth of your son.
Thank you so much for having me.
May you raise him well. And that's it. If you like the content you heard today, please remember to like, share, subscribe, follow, and stay tuned for next week when we'll be back with Sean and Ari.